Let's see where Chris is. Are we going to see Chris?
Yeah,
We do have Chris. What's up, Chris?
There he is.
There
Hi,
he is.
Chris.
Hi, guys.
I love
Hey,
John Boy, man. I like that John Boy jersey you got behind you.
Thank you. Yeah. Did somebody say I don't remember Tyrone Hill?
No.
Yes. Tyvis. He's young, though.
I've never heard of him.
He's never heard of Tyrone Hill.
Who is he? I'm missing out.
So Tyrone Hill was he was a decent big man. He did make an all-star team for us.
What year was this?
I think he played on the Sixers NBA Finals team
Sure
with
did.
Iverson. And went to Xavier. Good, solid player. Good dude. I think I remember reading a great story about him one time. Somebody asked about like his 1-year anniversary was coming up or something like that, and he had to turn to a PR director.
Oh,
Chris is on his phone, so if he gets a text, I think he's going to pop out for a sec, which is unfortunate downside of VMix. As soon as Chris pops back in, we'll bring him back.
If you get a text.
Tyrone
Tell
Hill.
him to put it on Do Not Disturb.
See, he played on. They had back then Tyrone Hill, Bob Sir, Wesley Person was on that hill. Michael Cage was on that.
Michael Cage.
Michael Cage was on that roster.
Supersonic.
Michael Cage.
What was Ricky
got it back.
Davis?
We got it back.
Who was the legend Ricky Davis?
Well, we got to hear the story. Hold on. I want Chris to tell
Oh,
the
no.
story. No?
Yeah, just that I think he had to check with the PR director as to when his wedding anniversary was.
Oh.
That's always kind of a bad sign.
Wow.
That's funny. Chris, we were talking
bad
about,
sign.
like, potential Jarrett. We just had a guy who does a Cavs podcast, does a good job with that. And he's suggesting all these Cavs trades where the Cavs are trading Jarrett Allen for, like, a lottery pick. In my mind, why would any team give up a lottery pick for Jarrett Allen? Am I being too overreactionary to how he played in the playoffs? Do you think they could get a lottery pick for him?
Well, I don't think it's so much how he played in the playoffs, but rather where the sport is.
Right.
Like, I love Jarrett Allen. I love his personality. Defensively during the regular season, he is an enormous help. But I think when you get to the playoffs, it's a different animal out there, right? Offensively, he's not Bam Adebayo, right?
Nope.
And he's definitely not Joker. Nobody is. Other than that, what 7-footer-ish type guy had a huge impact on the playoffs? They just don't. So at this point, I understand why we paid him $100 million at the time we did. I love who he is and what he gives the Cavs during the regular season. But if this team's goal is to start winning playoff rounds, plural, then they're going to have to look to move him. But I don't see teams giving up a lottery pick for him either, unless there's a lot more involved in the deal.
Right.
And maybe that's possible.
Well, Chris, after the playoffs happened, and I'm watching the Cavs, and they got Donovan Mitchell, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, we kind of far away. And then I look at the Guardians, and I say, okay, well, I don't know if we can win this way, playing small ball, not being able to, hit for power. And then I guess I look at the Browns and say, well, it could be a chance that either the coach signs an extension and we love him, or after 6 games we're like, oh, we're going to start over with this. I mean, who is the closest, as constituted, that you would say between the 3 teams that is the closest to winning a championship?
I think the Browns are the closest to winning it all, because if Deshaun gets back to what he was when they traded for him, at least perceived to be that way, then they're going to be in a lot of games this year. And I know that the AFC is really, really tough. But there is a lot of talent on this team, and I actually liked the offseason that Andrew Barry had. I thought a lot of his draft picks, trade, and free agent signings made sense for this roster. We're still either probably the 3rd or 4th best team in this division going in, right? You'd have to give the Bengals and the Ravens, I think, a leg up, but that doesn't mean that the Browns can't win this division, right? Look at where they finished compared to these other teams. It wasn't miles behind, and even though they were a last-place team, they weren't a last place team like some of these other squads that were out there.
Yeah.
So they, I think they're the closest. The Guardians, I think, have the best shot at the playoffs, as odd as that sounds. Well, I mean, outside, listen, the Cavs are a playoff team. But it feels like they've got a little bit of ways to go before they're true NBA title contenders.
Chris,
go
ahead, Dave.
Chris, I'll just cut straight to the point. D-Hop or DPJ?
I don't know. I mean, I've always loved DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, I think that he's got the stickiest hand to anybody in the NFL. But, yeah, if I had to guess, I would guess that this is DPJ's last year here. I just think that at some point you're not going to be able to pay everybody in the way that they drafted, that it probably makes sense. But I think both those guys would be one-year players. I know that they're getting more money freed up tomorrow when John Johnson officially comes off the books, but I just don't know if financially if they can reach what he's looking to get out there. But then again, I don't know how many teams can of serious contenders. Mm-hmm. That didn't really answer your question. He's obviously, when he's right, which has been a little bit now, he's one of the 5 best receivers in the game, and I don't think there's a question about it. So even though he's 31, about to be 31, he still can contribute. I mean, so why wouldn't you take your shot at him?
Yeah, I think it makes absolute sense. Chris, I want to get back to the Guardians. We talked about this before when Savali and McKenzie about to both come off the injured list. And we know, Logan Allen and Tanner Bybee have done a great job. We know Bieber's in the rotation. Mm-hmm. We know McKenzie's in the rotation. So Quantrill's been pretty bad. Obviously, he was awful yesterday. His ERA is now up over 5. Savali's been up and down in his Guardians career. When those two come back, if everybody else is still healthy, who are you booting for the rotation? Is it Savali or is it Quantrill?
Well, I think Savali's got to work his way back, right? He hasn't been great since he came back at the end of last season.
Right.
So he needs to show that he's healthy and dependable and all that sort of stuff. But one thing that Cal has been is he's been there every 5 days, and that's a big deal for a starting pitcher. I have said this several times that I really think this is the summer that we trade Shane Bieber. And it's not because I don't like Bieber. I love him. I think he's done amazing things, and even with his velocity drop, the fact that he still is in just about every start that he goes out there, gives you 7 innings, that's huge. But I just don't see him getting an extension here. I think that you could get a lot for him coming up at this trade deadline. I think that they could get some serious power back in that lineup. And I think that they could actually kind of turn this thing around on the fly. Bybee and Allen and Gavin Williams, who's the next one in line, like that, there are teams that would drool to have one of those guys.
No doubt.
We got 3 of them. So because of the way that we operate, you have to sometimes deal from a position of strength. The fact that we never hit home runs, guys. It is so hard to string together against the type of velocity that's out there. 3 or 4 hits in an inning to get multiple runs instead of just one swing of the bat. It's like they're fighting with one hand tied behind their back, and they know that that's the way it is right now.
Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. Now is the time not only to trade Bieber, but to trade him for some proven talent. Like, no more of these trades for minor leaguers. They've got 1 million minor leaguers. They've got a ton of talent. I think, I was talking about this yesterday, the Cardinals are a perfect trade partner for the Guardians. Mm-hmm. They are loaded with outfielders, right? I mean, Walker, they sent him back to the minors, but Tyler O'Neill, Dylan Carlson, on and on and on. They got all these outfielders. They need a pitcher. And the Guardians need some hitters with some power. I think a Bieber, as the crux of it being Bieber for Tyler O'Neill or Dylan or whoever, somebody, maybe 2 guys from that outfield mix. I think they're good trade partners. I hope that they can get something done like that, and I hope that they just don't trade for a bunch of A-ballers.
The problem is that is a Tyler O'Neill or, Alec Burleson are those guys going to put you over the top? That's the question. Whereas if you get a top-notch prospect who's right on the cusp of that, Baltimore's got a couple of kids. Like, I think that today's start for Shane Bieber is huge for Guardians fans. They're going to really want to watch this because if he shines against that team, they're a team that feels like offensively and bullpen-wise that they could get to the World Series. I think they know starting pitching-wise they're a little bit short. So if Shane Bieber's available and you dip into the best farm system, I'm talking about guys that are right there that could be playing in Cleveland right now. That's something you have to look at. Because I don't know if those Cardinals guys are the ones that put you over the top eventually somewhere down the line.
It may be. I get what you're saying. And you're saying, okay, well, we're not trading for A-ballers. We're trading for guys that are ready to come up in the big leagues right now. Speaking of which, Bo Naylor. I mean, he seems to be ready to come up to the big leagues right now. They've been aggressive, more aggressive the last couple of years with calling guys up. But for some reason with him, I know he was up for the doubleheader, but they haven't called him up. They're getting no production out of catcher right now. Are you surprised they haven't brought him up yet?
The only thing that we don't know is the greatest unknown, and that is how a guy calls a game and all that sort of stuff. Just, that's a big deal. Like, I can't tell you what catchers do. I've been around them for 30 years at the big league level, but they're a lot like offensive linemen. I know when they suck.
Right.
I just don't know when they're great.
Right.
And that is a huge deal. Like, we would see the 4 at-bats a night out of Bo Naylor and be like, yeah, dude is ready. But if he's not, then it could send your entire pitching staff the wrong direction. And that's the only way I'll defend the Guardians a little bit, one, is because I don't know. And it's the most mysterious position on the team. But, yeah, I can't watch Cam Gallagher and Mike Zunino hit 187 and balls are bouncing all over the place. And I'm like, I call my buddy Hedgie. I'm like, oh, my God.
Yeah.
Can we borrow your ball blocking skills? I know that sounds weird, but you understand what I'm getting at. So,
last thing on the Guardians here, before we hit on a couple other things, Chris, but I think the trade deadline, now obviously we got a long way to go. We got 2 months, but right now, I mean, the only 2 teams in all of baseball that are completely out of it are Kansas City and Oakland. Oakland's got nobody to trade. They don't have a single player, right? Ruiz is really their only good player, and they're not trading him. Kansas City, they got Aroldis Chapman, a couple guys in their bullpen, but they've really got not much to trade either. Maybe Salvador Perez, they trade him? I don't know, but the rest of their hitters that are good are all young. So there's almost like this is a seller's market, but I don't know how many sellers there are. Again, things may change. Maybe the White Sox and the Cubs fall out of it, and they have some pieces to change. To trade, but the Central divisions are so awful that I don't know that the Cubs or White Sox will completely fall out of it.
You got 2 months still.
Yeah, that's true.
I know weird stuff happens in this sport in 7 weeks. It just does.
Fair enough.
Teams can lose 9 out of 11, and then all of a sudden they're 7 games back instead of being 2, and then you look at your team and it's very different. So I think you just have to kind of let it play out a little bit more. But as of right now, it doesn't feel like there's a ton out there.
Right.
Whereas I think with starting pitchers, there's a few guys out there. There's a bunch of guys who are going to be free agents that I think will be available, you know. And then I think a guy like Bieber is kind of in his own category. You know, still in his 20s, still with 2 years of control left, and still at the top of his game. So I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of months. It's just I'm having a hard time watching this team right now with their inability to hit the ball to the gaps or over the wall. I'm rooting hard for them. I'm going to see them in person in San Diego in 2 weeks, but, man, it's just driving me up a wall.
It's tough to watch.
Chris, we've seen on the NBA side of things, a lot of these former NBA champion teams have let their coach go. Do you think J.B. Bickerstaff is the guy? Are you comfortable with him, or do you think they should explore looking at another coach?
So here's where I sit with that. The Cavs have played hard for him the last 2 years, right? And that is a big deal. The problem is that they play really hard and they play great defense during the season where everybody goes, when they get to the playoffs, they're like, well, Cleveland is number one in defensive this and that and the other thing. That's in part because the rest of the teams don't give a crap. They just don't care. They're playing for the fourth time in 6 nights, and they're like, whatever. And defense was horrible around the league this year. But then when guys are playing for something, when they get to the playoffs, they're like, it's time to crank it up. So then everybody gets to Cleveland's level defensively. We don't get any easy shots. And I saw Miami draw up a play out of a timeout the other day where they got a crystal clear look. And I feel like the last time that happened with the Cavs, Ty Lue was designing plays.
Yeah.
Like every time we'd come out of a timeout, boom, we'd score. I was like, that guy knows how to design plays. JB and his staff have got to get better at the basketball side of this stuff. They just have to. Because every shot in New York felt like we were in labor. Like it was impossible. There was not one shot that was easy. Not one shot. And that is, to me, that's partially on the coaching staff. So they've got the part down where I think the guys believe in the staff, but we got to grow as a staff when it comes to basketball-wise. Because I feel like we're getting left in the dust.
You know, Chris, a little along the lines of kind of what Tyvis is saying about J.B. Bickerstaff, and I think maybe this is a more question about Kobe Altman and the direction of the Cavs organization. So you give up the picks to Utah to get Donovan Mitchell, right? Kobe Altman said that, they won 51 games. So that's a big market in the league. We're not going to make any sweeping changes. But when you look at Donovan Mitchell's contract, I think he has 2 more years on his deal. And you know what that means. We should know. We've been through Kyrie. We've been through LeBron. When you got 2 years left on your deal, that means you got 1 year, really, because you're going to have to start thinking about whether or not he's going to sign the extension. When Kobe Altman says that, hey, we're not going to make any sweeping changes here, and I'm watching these other teams in the playoffs, and like you said, I'm watching Spoelstra with a play-in team go on the road to Boston after a heartbreaking loss and win that game. You look at some of the teams like Atlanta. You look at teams like Philadelphia. I'm looking at the Cavs, and I'm like, well, they might not be better than any of those teams. And if you're not going to make any sweeping changes, how do they go about getting better?
Well, I think to say you're not going to make any sweeping changes and to not make any sweeping changes are 2 totally different things. He doesn't have to tell us the truth. I mean, if so, he'd probably be the first sports executive in history to tell us the truth.
Right.
So I would like to see some changes, and I think that if there aren't changes, then the Cavs will get left behind. I think there'll be a 4 or 5 seed moving forward. As fun as this team was, and they were a ton of fun to watch, we had like 6 guys that could play. And it shocked the hell out of me because at the beginning of the year, I thought there were a lot more guys that could play on this team. Obviously, there was a gross miscalculation with the Kevin Love situation because they felt like Dean Wade could fill those shoes. And then at the end of the year, he's pulling splinters out of his ass because he's sitting on the bench. So they need to get more depth. They need to get more wing heavy. We're already fighting an uphill battle with starting a smallish front court. So defensively, guys are going to bully them. So there has to be changes. Because if not, then you could be a 50-win team, but the goal isn't to win 50 games.
Right.
The goal is to win all those games in the playoffs. And by the way, when you mentioned Philadelphia and Atlanta, they got their issues.
Yep.
They got a ton of issues, both those teams. One of them just had the MVP, and they freaking are infighting and getting rid of their coach, and who knows if that stuff's going to work.
That's true, and they choked. They choked, too. Chris, thank you for joining us. We appreciate the time, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Appreciate it, Chris.
You got it, guys. Anytime.